Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Triple N Media. I am Dr. NIK NIKAM, and today we are going to take our Nikon D7200 for a nighttime photography test drive. I am visiting Magical Winter Lights place in Lamarck, Texas, which is approximately 40 miles south of Houston near the Gulf, close to Galveston. And this is me standing in front of Magical Winter Lights. It is just before sunset, and you can see a clear picture of myself along with the backdrop. And this was taken using Nikon D7200 with a 18 to 140 millimeter lens. The exposure was 1/125th of a second at f5.6 at 32 millimeters and an ISO of 800. As the night sets in, we will see how the camera responds to the different scenarios. Here's another example which was also taken just before sunset, and this is at 1/200th of a second, 45 millimeters, ISO of 800, and the camera was set to no flash throughout the entire evening. Now let's look at this one, and we're going to contrast this after dark sets in. And here the setup is, we still have some daylight left here, and now the exposure is 1/25th at f5.0, 52 millimeters, ISO of 800, and no flash. Now let's proceed and see what happens as the sun sets and the darkness takes over the skies. Now here is a totally different picture of the same image, now taken at 38 millimeters with darkness setting in, 1/88th of a second at 4.5 and an ISO of 800, and it is a pretty clear picture just as the darkness is setting in. Now let's look at one of these other images, and this is a 48 millimeter zoom, 1/60th of a second, 4.5 and an ISO of 1600. Even though the ISO jumped to twice as the previous image, still the image is pretty clear and you don't see any type of granularity. Let's proceed further. Here is an example which is shot at 1/60th of a second, f4.5. It is 48 millimeters, so we are a little further away from the object, and again we did not use flash, and the ISO was automatically set by the camera to 1000. That's pretty good. Let's move on to the next image. This was shot at 85 millimeters, so that means it was much further away from me, and it was again shot by the camera at 1/60th of a second. Now here's another example, very clear picture. Now we have much darkness. You see the entire sky looks sort of uniform. That's because it was a cloudy day and there was not a single star we could see from the ground. Now this is shot at 1/60th of a second, f5.3, 85 millimeters. So this is much further away from where I was standing, and now the ISO jumps to 2500. Still we have crystal clear picture on a cloudy day. Here's another example. This is a replica of a space shuttle, and this was shot at a much closer distance of 35 millimeters focal length, 1/60th of a second, f4.2 and a ISO of 2800. So that's, there you have it. Let's move on to a couple of other pictures. Now this is shot at 1/60th, f4.0, 24 millimeters. This is I'm standing quite a distance from the picture here, and again no flash. Here's another beautiful example of picture shot at 1/60th of a second, f4.5 and 40 millimeters. So there is some zoom effect here used, and the ISO was still 900. Here is something that is special to Texas, the Texas Cowboy boot, which was shot at 1/60th of a second, f4.5, 48 millimeters and an ISO of 800, and of course no flash. And of course I am using Adobe Lightroom so that it gives me all the parameters for each picture that was shot using Nikon D7200. Let's look at some other pictures here, and this one was shot at 18 millimeters focal length. That means it was quite farther away from us, and again 1/60th of a second at f4.0 and an ISO of 800. We have beautiful pictures. I'm quite impressed with Nikon D7200, which can do spectacular pictures at night time if the lighting is appropriately adjusted. Now let's look at this particular dinosaur picture, which was zoomed all the way up to 140 millimeters. So that means I was standing quite a distance from this dinosaurus, and it was shot at 1/80th of a second, f5.6 of course, and the ISO jumped to 12,800. Still we have pretty clear picture. Now we can begin to see some noise in the background sky compared to a close-up image. Let's bring up a close-up image and I can show you the difference. And here's a close-up image which was shot at 40 millimeters, which absolutely has no noise whatsoever that you can detect. Compare that with a dinosaur which was shot at 70. This was shot at 70 millimeters, so the noise level is much less here compared to a noise level when it was zoomed all the way to 140 millimeters. So when we zoom, obviously we are going to bump up the ISO. The camera bumps the ISO to 12,800, and but the image itself is quite clear even at an ISO of 12,500 and a zoom of 140 millimeters. Let's see what else we can learn. And here's another picture which was zoomed at 45 millimeters, 1/60th of a second, 4.5, and an ISO of 2,500. See, as the ISO goes down, we see much clear background. As the ISO goes up, the granularity begins to show. Again, even though the image is very clear, people become pretty dark, and if you want to compensate that, we may want to use a flash, but when we use the flash, it's hard to know what the outcome of the actual images in the background are going to be. So here's another example of a deer which was shot at 90 millimeters. That means I was quite a distance from here, but since the background was slightly lit, we don't see that granularity we saw in the dinosaurus picture. So there is some compensation here because of the light where the image, and of course it is using an ISO of 800. So one of the important lessons here is, if you can do anything to reduce the ISO in a nighttime shooting by adjustments, then it is so much better because your image quality improves and the background noise gets lesser. And here are the pictures taken at nighttime now, and as you can see, people are all looking like dark shadows. The only way to light up their face would be to use a close-up flash, but now you can see how beautifully the whole castle is lit with beautiful clear letters when it was shot at 1/80th of a second at f4.5, 23 millimeters, and an ISO of 800. So the key is, as long as the ISO is below 1000, Nikon D7200 camera can do a fantastic job of getting clear images in nighttime settings, and it was a great experiment for me to see how we can use this camera in a night setting. Here's another example where this was 100 millimeters, so this was fairly zoomed picture. It was shot at 1/60th of a second at 5.6, and again it used only ISO of 900 because most of the area inside this picture is lit. If you have more of the sky which is dark, then it may begin to increase the ISO to compensate for the darkness and create granularity. So that's one important thing to realize. Here's a picture of an Eiffel Tower, and the sky looks pretty dark and uniform. That's because it was uniformly cloudy that day. So this was at 75 millimeters, 1/60th of a second, f5.0, ISO of 2500. So this was my experimentation using Nikon D7200 in nighttime shooting. I think the key I learned from this project is to keep the ISO as low as possible, and then we should have pretty clear pictures. Thank you so much for watching, and please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.